Davis steps under center. Gibson and McClendon behind him. Davis with motion by Richard. Will give the ball to McClendon. He leaps. Oh, he doesn't get in. He fumbled the football. Carolina holds. The game is over. And Carolina has won the game.
Finley to throw. Over the middle, intercepted. Wolford again. Wolford the other way at the 30, the 40. Wolford to midfield. Miles Wolford with the pick. The Heels on the doorstep of an enormous victory.
Left side of the line. Hood standing to Williams' right. Williams gonna throw. One-on-one. Davis has it. Touchdown. Carolina wins. Carolina is the Coastal Division champion. Bernard fields it at the 26. Heading to the far side. Gio at the 35. Gio is at the 50. No, he's not. Yes, he is. Gio is going to take it for a touchdown. Are you kidding me? Connor Barth for the possible win. Snap, spot, kick away, high enough, long enough. It's good! It's good! Carolina has won the game on a 42-yard field goal by freshman Connor Barth. Good gosh, dirty!
This is the Heel Tough Blog Podcast.
Hey guys, and welcome to another edition of the Heel Tough Blog Podcast. It's Anthony Pagnotta, Josh Marlowe with you. And today, we are getting you ready for the upcoming Tar Heel football season. The team is officially 1 week into camp as we record here on Wednesday of this week in August. And the excitement is officially starting to build. We have coaches' polls that are out. Basically, all of the watch lists have officially been completed. Carolina has a pretty good representation in all this. We're going to talk about that here in just a minute. Also talk about some stuff going on in fall camp. We're going to do some true-false, which is based off of some of the stuff that we've heard from the countless interviews that guys have done. They have had a ton of media availability so far to start camp. Today is actually the first day that they didn't have anybody available to the media, at least when I checked earlier, in terms of players, coaches. They've had a bunch of guys come through and talk, so we've gotten a little bit of a feel for that. We'll react to some of that with a little true-false. We'll do our bold predictions for the upcoming season. We told you that edition of the podcast was coming. The article will follow pretty close behind, where we'll go a little more in-depth on that as well. So we're going to do that on today's podcast, and then we'll close out with a couple of last-minute notes that you guys will definitely want to stick around for, including one huge recruiting note that we'll get to on the back end. But let's start out talking about some of that stuff. I mean, the watch list, there's countless. Sam Howell, of course, leads the list of guys. Bo Corrales is on a watch list. Ty Chandler in the Doak Walker Award watch list. But I think the biggest news in terms of the preseason so far for the Tar Heels is the fact that they do come in ranked number 9 in the coaches poll. Carolina just behind Iowa State, just ahead of Cincinnati, inside the top 10 in the coaches poll. So this is a big start for Carolina. I think, again, when you get to the AP poll, that's the one that most of the major outlets, including ESPN, they run by in terms of their rankings that they put next to the name when Carolina's on television, everything like that. So that's the other one that we're waiting for right now. But this is a pretty good step in the right direction for Carolina, and it kind of shows where the hype is at around this Carolina team this year amongst even the coaches throughout the sport.
Well, I don't know if you know this, but the coaches poll was voted on, by the coaches. And if the coaches around the country...
The point I just made would kind of hammer that home. Buddy, I'm going to tell you are on it today with the hard-hitting facts. Dude, Josh Scoops Marlowe is just killing
That might be
today.
My new name.
I'm telling you.
It shows you where our competitors think we are within the ACC, Clemson, and Miami. But nationally, they think this team is a preseason top 10 team. A lot of that's because you've got, arguably, in our opinion, the best quarterback in college football. If not, he's a top 2 quarterback in the country, and who's going to be taking snaps for you. So it shows you where we've come. It's we haven't been this high since '97 when they were number 8 in the preseason poll. That was Mac Brown 1.0. That's, of course, Mac Brown 2.0. But
also wasn't a bad season that year either. So
yeah, this is I've been waiting for the college football kick in the butt to get me going, and it's coming because we got the first poll. We get the AP poll next week, and then by that you're 2 weeks less away before they actually start hitting people and playing games.
You don't. What about that week 0 matchup between Hawaii and UCLA? You think that's going to get the horse moving?
No.
Yeah, no, but I mean, for the first week of college football this year, it's pretty stacked. And look, Carolina, that's one of the biggest games out of the gate. So we're going to learn a lot about this team very, very quickly. But yeah, like you mentioned, there's a lot of people that feel pretty good about this Carolina team, and I think it's very telling that they are inside of that top 10. We'll talk a little bit more about that here in just a second. But one thing that I did want to note is that, of course, the first week of practice is in the books, and there are a couple of guys that have not been out there, according to some of the reports. Brian Anderson, we know that has been talked about by the coaching staff, everything like that. He is not out there. He was seen. There was a photo that was circulating around that somebody sent to me of him in a walking boot. Not sure, what exactly the injury is. Again, Mac Brown is one of those guys. He loves using the hockey terms when it comes to injuries. Lower body, upper body. They like to be somewhat discreet about what they're releasing to the media. But the belief is, at least from what everybody has said, is that he will be back in time for the season opener. If not, I don't think there's a whole lot of panic from a lot of people because of Kieran Johnson. Remember, he started the game last year against Wake Forest. Carolina's offense was not the issue in that game. So I think that people feel decent about that position, even with Brian Anderson not being there right now. Storm Duck also is another guy that is reportedly out right now. That one has not really been confirmed. That's just something that I've seen rumored. So I'm not sure if that's actually the case, but we'll kind of find out as we go get a little bit closer to the start of the season whether or not he's going to be there. It seems like from another little tidbit that I saw, most people believe that everybody is going to be ready for the start of the season. And I'm assuming that includes Storm Duck in that conversation. But we'll just have to wait and see. Beau Corrales is limited right now in practice. That was another note that I saw. That, again, is something that has not been confirmed, but that I did see floating around out there. Tamari Fox, Joshua Ezeudu, Chafry Brown, guys that were injured in the spring. Both, first two guys missed all of spring camp. Chafry Brown, of course, practiced in the first couple of practices, injured himself there, and then missed the rest. They are all apparently, as it seems, full participants in camp. Tamari Fox did confirm that he is. Mac Brown hinted at the fact that Chafry Brown was. He said he was well in his press conference, so I'm assuming that means that he is out there. And Ezeudu, haven't seen anything saying he's not out there, so the assumption is he's out there right now. That is Carolina's arguably best offensive lineman. If he wasn't out there, you would feel that somebody would have said something. So let's get into it, talk a little bit about the press conferences. And yeah, look, there have been a bunch of press conferences that have been going on. Of course, Mac Brown led the week off back on Thursday. Quarterback Sam Howell joined him as well. They were up on the big podium. And then the guys have been doing stuff after practice. You've had both Phil Longo, Jay Bateman have talked, and you've had a bunch of guys from all over the offense and the defense come in to talk to the media. So we've gotten a lot of really good interviews that have come out from the media. Great, have to hand it to the guys over there at Tar Heel Athletics in that office of getting these guys there so we can hear a little bit from these guys. And look, I mean, certain position groups, they haven't really said a lot. Going to tell you, running backs, we don't really know anything. They asked Gregory Hall, who does a great job for Inside Carolina. He asked Ty Chandler directly, who's taking the most snaps behind you? Ty Chandler proceeded to give a non-answer where he basically shouted out the entire running back room, which is good leadership. Great job by him. But, for us that are kind of, chomping at the bit to find out what this depth chart looks like a little bit. Didn't help us out too much. So there's nothing in here about that, but there were a lot of things that came out. But first, the first true false that we're going to do, we're going to do 5 of these. It's simple. Tell me true or false on these statements. First one is one that doesn't have anything to do with what we heard when it came to the media. What am I looking for? Availabilities. Yeah, there we go. I said it so many times before. They didn't talk about it there. They may coming up here, but the poll didn't come out until yesterday, probably after all the guys interviewed, so no one really was able to ask them about that. But Carolina ranked number 9 in the coaches poll, as we talked about. Do you think that this statement is true or false? The Tar Heels deserve to be ranked number 9 in the coaches poll.
I say true. I would make the argument they should be ranked higher because then they should be ranked ahead of Notre Dame. Notre Dame was ranked 7th. They were the only school in the top 7 Oklahoma's the only school that returns its quarterback from a year ago. Notre Dame, I think, of all the teams ranked ahead of Carolina, is probably lesser in terms of talent than Carolina, and maybe Iowa State. But Matt Campbell's done a fantastic job there. But I say true. I think they deserve to be in the top 10.
Yeah, that's it. That's interesting. I would say true. I would definitely say number 9, I think, is probably the right spot for them. Notre Dame, I think, could be lower. But I think between them and Carolina, I mean, the thing is if you look later on into the schedule, the game against Notre Dame, that's a game that, I think at this point would be a toss-up. And I think by that time, that Notre Dame team will also be a much different team than the one that takes the field to start the season. But you're right. Lose their starting quarterback. They lose a majority of their offensive line, which, as we know, that's been a strength of Notre Dame for a while. So they'll have other guys that are coming in, but that's another place where when they're at their best, it's because of seniority down there. So we'll see. They've got some pieces that they have to replace there. I think people want to make the argument that Carolina's ranked a little too high. But let's be honest. I mean, who behind them do you really think should be ranked ahead of them? I mean, one team that I saw,
I'd probably go Cincinnati. Made a New Year's Six bowl game last year. You turn their starting quarterback. They play in a much more easier conference. Like if they're undefeated, no one's going to be surprised at the end of the season.
Right, but they don't play the schedule that Carolina does. So I think that could help them. I would take Sam Howell over Desmond Ridder, which I think would be a big factor in that game.
I think anybody would take.
Well, yeah, but look, Desmond Ridder's a legitimate quarterback. That's one of those guys. I mean, look, just off the top of my head, of guys returning, he's got to be a top 10 starter in the country, right? I mean, he's a heck of a player. I saw people trying to make the argument for Florida based on the fact that they probably have more sheer talent.
I mean, that's not an argument, but they've lost a lot.
Right. And I think, look, the talent gap is closing between them and Carolina. Carolina's added a lot of talent. Like, this is a team that looks a lot different than a few years ago. Like, this isn't a team, like, I would say, I mean, Carolina, I think they have probably I don't know, maybe around the same, maybe a little bit higher amount of talent than Miami right now. So they're probably in that range. I think Florida, I mean, they're still ahead of Carolina, but yeah, I'm with you. I think they lose a lot at the skill positions. You lose your starting quarterback, and I don't get the Emory Jones hype. I think can be good, but do we really think he's a game-changing quarterback? Do we think he's going to be that much better for that offense than Kyle Trask was?
I don't know.
I don't really know that either. And then Oregon was another one that I saw up there, but I just, is it just me, or is there nothing really that attractive about Oregon outside of Thibodeau, their pass rusher? I don't see, like, this isn't the dynamic Oregon offense that we've seen in years past where you'd say, well, they're going to put up a ton of points. That might allow them to be better than Carolina. Like, that's kind of where I'm at with that. So I'm with you. All right, how about this one? Tar Heels have one of the top 3 defensive line units in the ACC this season. This comes pretty much after, I mean, the defensive line unit was easily the most talked about unit by anybody on the defensive side of the football, and we heard from a bunch of guys on that defensive line. Feels like the talent is there from what they're saying. Do you think it's a top 3 unit in the ACC right
Yes. I would go yes. I like when we broke down this position group, you like the talent, but what do we like more about what they've added in the last couple of years? There's a lot more depth up there. I think and we've seen that in the last couple of years that you need that depth. So I would say yes.
I hate to be this guy, but yeah, I'm going to have to go true. I mean, look, I think they're still behind Clemson for sure.
Yes.
Brzee, Miles Murphy. I mean, that's a loaded group. Miami, I think, is definitely going to have a good unit again this year, but that's another one where you kind of they lose their top 2 pass rushers from a year ago. How do they
Miami
adjust
breeds
to that?
defensive line talent because there's too much talent in the state of Florida for them not to.
But you're talking about statistically 2 of the best that they've had in a long time. That pass rushing combo last year was special, but between Phillips and Roche, both gone now.
The best thing is that if your defensive line's being mentioned in the same breath as Clemson and Miami, you're doing something right.
Right. Yeah, and outside of that, I mean, look, Pittsburgh, they are another one year in and year out that seems to produce a pretty good group up front. NC State's had some good defensive lines, but, losing Aleem McNeil, it feels like they're probably going to be a little bit behind Carolina. But like you said, I think the starters are one thing. You bring everybody back from a year ago, but you're talking about the depth that now, I mean, from hearing them talk in these press conferences, this group, from what it seems, they can go about 9 or 10 deep. And that is something I can't remember the last time. I don't even know if they could do that under Butch Davis. I think that the talent level of the guys that were rotating in may have been higher than the group that will be out there this year for Carolina. But in terms of sheer numbers, I think this may be the deepest we've ever seen this defensive line.
I think we're about to find out.
So I definitely agree on that one. Jaquarius Conley and Giovanni Biggers will start multiple games together this year. We heard from both of these guys. Gio Biggers is the guy that has been talked about by every defensive back and Jay Bateman in these press conferences as the guy that has stood out on this defense. Even some of the defensive linemen and the wide receivers have talked about him and how he has grown from when he arrived to Carolina, and especially has taken a jump this spring and now into the fall. It seems like, from what they're saying, he is going to be a big factor here, whether it's at free safety or the bandit safety position is what they're calling it. He says he's been rotating back and forth between those 2 spots. Jaquarius Conley confirmed to the media he is taking all of his snaps at that bandit safety position, so it looks like he's going to play a big role there. This one's a little bit trickier because this means that Trey Morrison would be the guy that would be the odd man out, but I think there's a lot of hype around these 2 guys. Do you think that both of these guys could start alongside each other multiple games alongside
Does multiple – is that 4? Or is it? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so 4, like 2 is a couple, so if you is 3, so multiple's 4, right?
Multiple games technically would be 2, but I think, I would say probably at least 3. How about that? At least 3 games beside each other.
I don't know. Oh, that's – I'm going to go false.
Okay.
I do think Giovanni Biggers is going to have a much bigger role on this defense.
You got to make that joke every time.
And so I don't know. I think that will be, and we mentioned this when we brought that up, I think that'll be a performance that'll be a week by week thing. Like whoever they think, it's like the who's hot at running back or whatever. Like, who they think's playing better at that moment, they're going to play.
Who's got the hot hand? Really, who is the most consistent heading into that week is going to be more of what it is.
Yep.
I'm going to go true.
Okay.
I think at some point, from what they've been saying about him, Biggers is going to get a starting role at some point. They have talked so much about his growth. He's a guy that gets raved about, and no slight against Trey Morrison. I just think potentially later on in the season, and another angle that you could approach with this is, look at the injury luck that they've had back there. At some point, I think both of these guys will get on. And here's the other thing, like you said, I could see games where Giovanni Biggers starts along with Conley, and you see heavy rotation of Trey Morrison coming in. So I'm going to say true. I think at some point you see both of those guys out there multiple games starting together.
I think another element to this is that's a guy that, like, look, we root for all the players and for the team, but like, that's a guy that's been here. He could have left. He could have transferred, but
no doubt.
He stuck around, and he's on the verge of reaping the rewards. And those kind of guys in this day and age, you always pull.
I mean, look, he comes from the DMV area. If he wanted to transfer to Maryland, they would have taken him in a heartbeat. So you're right. I mean, he's a guy that put in the work. He talked a lot when he was up there on Tuesday about the fact that last spring, when they were in the COVID period, he really focused with his dad on learning the defense, sort of getting it down pat. This year, sort of put that into effect when he was on the field in the spring. Yep. He's added the weight because he came in at 174. He said he was way too light for the position. Now he's at 198, which allows him to play the bandit safety, as he described it, basically the boundary safety or the guy that fills the box, the role that Cam Kelly played last year.
Yeah.
So at that weight, it feels like he can handle that role as well. And I think that's the best part about him when you talk about him, is that he can play either one of those positions. So the more versatility that you have, better chance you're going to play. So I think it's really working out for him. And yeah, I have to go true on that one. Continuing true false here, in case you guys are trying to catch up on exactly what we're doing. You have Emory Simmons is a guy that a lot of people have been talking about in that wide receiver room. As we know, De'Ami Brown is gone. He is currently with the Washington Redskins, doing well, by the way. Close to potentially
football team.
Potentially, oh yeah. The amount of times that I do that when talking about them. Good. Thanks for catching me on that one. The Washington football team, he has...
Someone asked me the other day who he played for. I just told him football team.
That's a good team, dude. That's a quality football team right
Football
there.
team that won the NFC East last year.
They did. Yes, exactly. And look, he's got a chance to earn a pretty big role there, but that means Carolina is out without the guy that was their deep threat a year ago. Carolina's trying to find that guy. There have been some guys that have been floated out there. I think the majority of us thought that with his speed, that would be Joffrey Brown.
Yeah.
May not necessarily be the case, or it may not be as clear that Joffrey Brown is going to be the guy as at least I thought when we talked a couple weeks ago on the podcast. Now there's other guys entering the fray. One guy that is not mentioned here, but I think deserves to be mentioned because he was talked about multiple times. Justin Olsen's getting a lot of run. There are a lot of people that think that he has shown some pretty good things in camp. A lot of the guys believe that he is going to be a factor when it comes to the guys that can be the deep threat. But ultimately, the guy that has been talked about the most is the guy that has supposedly added a lot of speed to his game. He said this himself, and Jaquarius Conley backed this up, and is apparently out there clocking in at about 21 miles per hour on the GPS tracker that they do each day. They actually have a ranking up on the board at the end of each day to see who is moving the fastest in practice. It's a little competition thing, and with the modern technology, you can measure these types of things. But it's Emory Simmons who has been that guy. So the big question here is do you think Emory Simmons is the deep threat for this 2021 offense? I'm going to be honest.
I'm going.
You have no choice but to say true here.
This is
your guy.
This is my dude. But no, I mean, I think everything you've just said. A lot of guys in the wide receiver room, they've spoken about him, and look, there's a lot of talent in that room. There's a lot of depth in that room. So if his name's being brought up, he's doing something right. So I say true because I think he's put in the work. But also, I mean, I think Carolina has to have that if they want to make the ACC title game. So if you already have that going into that game at Virginia Tech, you feel a lot better about your chances.
Well, here's the thing. Somebody has to be the deep threat. And I believe that guy is somewhere on this roster because if you don't have the deep threat, then this offense is not going to be anywhere near as effective as it was last year. In order for this offense to be at its best, we've talked about it multiple times, you have got to be able to hit the deep ball. And look, Josh Downs will help you there, but you need that guy on the outside that can be that primary take the top off guy and allow Josh Downs to do that occasionally, but work in the slot and be that short yardage, reliable receiver that he can be out there as well. I got to go True as well. With everything that everybody's saying, the added speed for him. I mean, he was up. He said last year he was up to 205. Now he's back down to 190, which is where he's used to playing at. So the speed is back there for him.
Man, we're now the same weight at 190, and we run the same speed, 21 miles per hour.
I'm going to be honest. I think at this point, you've reached the weight where your car doesn't even go 21 miles an hour with you in it. Now, mine doesn't even make it to 15. So, it is what it is. But I just – something tells me this is one of those guys, from hearing him talk, from hearing the other guys on the team talk about him, hearing the coaches talk about him. This feels like that guy that is in the junior year where he sort of breaks out. He's been sitting behind some of these other guys, and rightfully so. I mean, look, he's shown some flashes, but you weren't putting him in the game over De'Ami Brown. You weren't putting him in the game over a healthy Bo Corrales. You weren't putting him in the game over a healthy Daz Newsome, and he knows that. He brought that up the other day. So he knows that this is his opportunity, and it feels like he's seizing it. I got to go True on this one as well. Last one that we'll do here of True False, then we'll get into the bold predictions. Garrett Walston finishes top 3 on the team in receiving this season.
So does that mean in terms of catches and yards, or just catches, or just yards?
I would say yards is going to be what you're going to measure here, because I don't know if his catches are going to be...
I would say if Emery Simmons is your deep threat, I say false, because I think your top 3 receivers are going to be Josh Downs, Corrales, and then Simmons if he's your deep threat. If you don't have a deep threat, I think absolutely there's that possibility. But considering what you asked at number 4, I say false.
I'm going to go false here, but I will say this. I do think that there is a chance based on, I'm not even saying Simmons or Downs. I am more concerned about the ability of Bo Corrales to stay healthy right now. Because, I mean, look, probably just taking it slow coming back. But for him to still be limited right now, remember, he got injured in the middle of last season against Florida State. Now, sports hernia injury is not anything to mess around with. That's a tough injury, especially because he had to have surgery on it and everything like that. But that's my one concern there. If he stays healthy, false. But I think if he struggles with his health, there could be some guys that rotate in there. Or like you said, if Emery Simmons doesn't end up being that deep threat, they got to rotate some guys there. I think there's a chance, but I'm going to go false as well. So that's our true-false segment here on the show. We are going to have, I am currently finishing up, and we'll have that up there before the podcast for you guys to look at. It'll be just our takeaways from that first week of interviews outside of the Mack Brown interview. As I mentioned, heard from Sam Howell, bunch of other guys in there, Josh Downs, Ty Chandler, Tamari Fox, Trey Morrison, Jaquarius Collins, all those guys. We have, some takeaways from all that and the coordinators as well. That'll be going up on the website for you guys to take a look at here on the night of recording. I'm going to put that up later tonight, so make sure that you guys go and check that out on the website. It should be up for you guys right now. Let's move into our bold predictions. This is one of our favorite things that we do each year. This and the breakout candidates, one of our favorite things that we do both on the podcast and on the website. We're going to, go through, give you our bold predictions here. We will also have something up on the website, as we normally always do. We'll put something up on there where we'll sort of go a little more in depth on it. But I'm going to lead this one off because I feel like your final one is the most bold of the group. So I'm going to go first because we're going to do like we always do. We're going to do the alternating back and forths. So at number 1, and I go from lukewarm takes, or I wouldn't even say lukewarm. I would say warm to hot takes here in terms of my bold predictions. I feel like you probably did it the same way. So at number 1, I got Des Evans leads the team in sacks this year, and he gets the double-digit sack mark. That's a mark that Carolina's been trying to get to for a while. The last guy to do it, believe it or not, you have to go all the way back to Kareem Martin back in 2013. So this is it's going to take a lot to get there for sure.
A Larry Fedora defense had a guy reach double digits in sacks.
To be fair, that was a Butch Davis holder. So, yes, Larry Fedora defense, but a Butch Davis talent guy. Kareem Martin was a supreme talent that came in. Really, probably one of the more underrated defensive linemen when you talk about that Butch Davis era and the guys that produced in that era. But I think, it's setting up for him to do. He has put on so much weight. He's a guy that he already had the talent. We knew that. And now it feels like you're starting to see some of these guys up front, these D linemen that we've talked about. They're going to be deep, but there's going to be talent up there. I think there's going to be a lot of one-on-one situations for him. And from what we've heard, the body is ready, and we've seen the mindset that he has as a pass rusher. I think Des Evans leads the team in sacks, and he hits that double-digit mark. It may be exactly 10, but I think he gets there.
I start at the offensive side of the football. I think Carolina will have multiple guys with 10 or more touchdown receptions. To clarify, I have Josh Downs and Beau Corrales reaching the 10 or more plateau. Carolina did reach that 2 years ago with De'Ami Brown and Daz Newsome. So it hasn't been that far since it's happened, but you're talking about a guy who's stepping into the starting role in Josh Downs. And then Corrales, if the only way, if he doesn't get healthy, that's really going to put a damper on it.
Right.
But he is easily going to be Carolina's red zone target or Sam Howell's target once they enter that 20-yard line.
And look, I think there's a legit chance that he gets healthy. I think that's. Bo, like you mentioned, he's going to be your red zone threat, and then Josh Downs, you just feel he's so electric, man. Like he's going to get his yards, he's going to get his touchdowns. I think there's definitely a legitimate chance. I think depending on who emerges and how quickly they do it, I think this could be similar to a few years ago where you have those two guys in double digits, and then you have a guy like Emery Simmons maybe at like that 6 or 7 mark right there where
I think
Beau
it's
Corrales
possible.
Was. So at number 2, I've got Jeremiah Gemmel as a first-team All-ACC linebacker. And you may be saying, well, why is this really all that bold? He is a legitimate player. And look, I think you are spot on about that. I really like him. I think he's a guy that should have been recognized when it came to preseason recognition. But you look at the guys that were recognized as preseason All-ACC, and look, these guys are not slouches. James Skalski from Clemson was a no-doubter. He was going to be on there. Same thing with Peyton Wilson of NC State. Nick Jackson of Virginia, another legitimate guy. There's a bunch of other guys that a lot of people think have a chance to have a really good year. Isaiah Moore out of NC State as well. Balin Spector out of Clemson. But I think even with all those guys there, we've seen the success that Jeremiah Gemmel can have, primarily when he can be that guy that is focusing on the run game and is doing what he does best, which is living in the backfield. Now, being that Eugene Asante is out there with him, and we've talked about this quite a few times here on the podcast so far this offseason, it looks like he is going to be in a role that probably fits him a little bit better, which is that guy that is going to be a true inside linebacker. He won't have to leave the box often in coverage. Ideally, you'd rather have Eugene Asante as the guy that drops back into coverage if you need him. And he can be that guy that can get after the quarterback if you need him to. I feel like I don't think he's going to have the same sack numbers as Chaz Surratt, but I really do feel like he's a guy that's going to have a big season. I think he can get to that 100 tackle mark, and I think that he ends up being that guy that by season's end, there are a lot of great linebackers in this conference, but I think if he gets to that 100 tackle mark, I think he can finish with double-digit tackles for loss. He's going to be too hard to ignore to keep off that first-team group.
I go to the linebacker group as well, but I got his counterpart. I got Eugene Asante will lead the team in tackles and will top Chaz Surratt's 115 mark from 2 years ago.
I'm going to be honest. I got your list here in front of me. Not going to spoil it. I think that should be your third one?
Well,
honestly, that's a lot. 115. That's a lot, man.
He had double-digit tackles in the Orange Bowl. The first game he started, you got a 12-game model in front of you. 12 times 10 is 120. There's a
good job on that. Scoops Marlowe over here picking it up.
There's a pathway to get to it. I had to find something to make it a little bit more bold because I think if he leads the team in tackles, no one's going to be surprised. So I had to get a number, and that 115 is pretty high.
It would be so if you had it as he leads the team in tackles, I think you could have put that as your first one, and because I think most people are probably of the belief that Gemmel will lead the team in tackles, so I think it might be a little bold, but yeah, adding the 115, it's bold, but you're right. Look, his numbers are impressive, and even you talk about some of the other games that he appeared in last year. Every time he was in the game, he made an impact. This is not a guy that, he flashed in that game against A&M, which in and of itself should be enough, but in any of the other situations where he was on the field, I think every time he was out there, we kind of said to ourselves, why is this guy not playing more? So I feel like that's one that it's bold, but I think you could definitely see it happening. But I like it. So number 3, I have Giovanni Biggers will lead the Tar Heels in interceptions in 2021. Look, I think the popular opinion is that Tony Grimes will lead the team in interceptions, which I think is possible. I also think that not that many teams are going to challenge Tony Grimes this season. Now, look, if Storm Duck's on the other side, you probably don't want to challenge him too often as well. But you're talking about a guy in Storm Duck who, again, is still banged up, it appears, in fall camp. Kyler McMichael, if he is the guy there, look, Kyler McMichael's talented. If I'm a quarterback, I would rather try to take my chances against Kyler McMichael than Tony Grimes. So I think that allows for some other guys to maybe step up and have a chance to be that leader in interceptions. And I think Giovanni Biggers, he's a guy that was a playmaker in high school. We've heard that he can play both safety positions, and he's got the athleticism there to him. I think he's that guy that Carolina may be looking for in terms of a defensive playmaker, and I think he leads the team in interceptions.
You have Des Evans leading the team in sacks, Jeremiah Gemmel getting first-team All-ACC honors. I have Eugene Asante leading Carolina in tackles. I got Ray Vohasek being a first-team All-ACC member. As we talked about, Carolina having a top 3 defensive line in the ACC. We've seen the impact he had back 2 years ago when he kind of played. He got his minutes or his snaps in November, made an impact. Last year, the first half of the season, he was dominant. Got worn down. The defense wasn't the same the second half of the season. I think he's more equipped this year to handle the snaps. There's going to be a lot more rotation up front. And I think he's going to anchor what's going to be the best defensive line we've seen from Carolina in quite some time.
So we didn't talk about it in the true-false segment, but it's a thing that I touch on in the takeaways from the interviews. One of the common themes that you heard from everybody on the defensive side of the football, especially the guys up front, and especially Mack Brown and defensive coordinator Jay Bateman, was fewer plays to more production.
Yep.
That is the mantra of this team this year. And I think that Ray Vohasek and I also think Tamari Fox are going to be guys that you're going to look at and see that this year. While the numbers were good last year, especially Tamari Fox. His numbers were really, really good for a defensive end. You could see, and Tamari admitted this as well, there were times late in games where even though he had good statistics in the game, he got worn down, and he didn't make the plays late in games. So while the statistics may not be as mind-blowing, the impactful plays will be what will stand out more this year because while they may not be on the field as much, they're going to be fresher, and it'll allow them to make the plays when they need to. I agree with you. I still think Ray Vohasek has a good chance to be there. This is bold. I'm going to say this, though. It's not overly bold, and that's why I thought I'd have it lower. Our guy, Phil Steele, has him as a third-team All-American. So there are a lot of people around the community that really like him throughout college football. And I think you're right, especially if he can stay healthy this year. He got banged up a little bit early on last year as well in the game against Boston College. I don't think that really affected him all that much, but I think, especially if he can stay healthy, last year he did have to miss a game. If he can not miss a game this year, I think no doubt he is definitely in the conversation when it comes to that group. Now, it's going to be a tough group to crack because you're talking about Miles Murphy at Clemson and Brian Brzee, who are down there at defensive tackle. But I think you're right. He's definitely got a legitimate chance to be in there. Number 4, I've got this one. I don't know how bold this one. I had trouble gauging where this would be at.
To be honest, looking at you, I got your list in front of me. I'd put this as your most bold prediction.
Really?
Yes.
I don't know, man. That other one.
Go ahead and say it.
I think the Tar Heels finished with a top 25 overall defense nationally. Now, part of this.
When's the last time that happened? So it's been a decade or more.
I mean, here's the thing. Part of this, I think, is the fact that your schedule lends very well to this.
Schedule led. They've had a favorable schedule the last 2 years and they couldn't stop nobody.
Well, but okay. But your that's one element. The fact that your talent is there as well, I think, is the other big thing. And here's the other thing that I really like about this unit is we've talked about not only that the talent's there, but now the depth is starting to come in there. So if you suffer some of these injuries, a lot of people feel like this is a unit that can sustain that and move forward. I mean, to be honest with you, they were asking Jaquarius Conley the other day which unit he thought was the best on the team. You would think, okay, he'd probably say the defensive backfield because he's a part of that. Got a lot of depth as well, a lot of options. No, wasn't them. Maybe the D-line, right? A lot of guys down there, 9 rotation players, potentially 10. No, it wasn't them. He said the linebackers. He feels like Power Echols and Ra Dilworth are gaining closer and closer to Jeremiah Gemmel and Eugene Asante in terms of their readiness to play in a game. So I feel like there is depth all over this defense. And I feel like if they're going to be as good as the expectations think they are, I don't know if this is necessary, but this would go a long way to getting them where they want to go.
I think it's necessary, but that's me. 4 for me. The last time that Carolina had a Heisman finalist, of course, I wasn't alive. My dad wasn't alive. Even my mama who birthed my dad wasn't alive. All the way back when Charlie Choo Choo Justice was a Heisman finalist, back when Carolina was a football school, not a basketball school, and going to the Sugar Bowl in back-to-back years. I think that changes this year. We've said it at nauseum since the season ended that Sam Howell's the best quarterback in our opinion in the country.
Yes.
You argue that with Spencer Rattler. I think those will be the two lead. They are the two leading candidates to be in New York. I think Sam Howell gets there, and I do think he will be a Heisman finalist, giving Carolina their first since Charlie Choo Choo Justice.
So I go a step further at number 5, and this is why, to me, this doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. Where you're making this argument just a minute ago. They have not, like you said, they have not had a legitimate Heisman candidate since 1949. Like, seriously. We were coming out of World War II.
Like,
the last time that they had a legitimate threat
I think if you
to win the Heisman.
I think if you put, Julius Peppers in our era of college football, I think what he did might have gotten Heisman. Because, Ndamukong Suh got Heisman conversation. Jadeveon Clowney got Heisman conversation. And Peppers was just as good, just as dominant, if not better than both of those guys.
I am trying to remember. I don't have the UNC record book in front of me, which has those statistics, but I believe it was either him or Dre Bly who did finish in the top 10 in voting back during their time at Carolina. They've had a couple other guys that have been like in 7th or 8th. Mike Voigt was in there at one time. There's a lot of people that believe Kelvin Bryant at one point in his career was headed for that. I forget what season it was. I believe it was 84. He ends up going down with an injury. A lot of people thought that could have been one of the years where he got in there. But this is the first time that we've seen where national writers, there are guys predicting he will be the Heisman Trophy winner. I'm no national writer, but I'm predicting, this is one of my bold predictions, he wins the Heisman. And I think there's a couple elements that go into this. First of all, Carolina's record is a big factor in this. I think that Carolina is going to win 10 or 11 games this season. I have them in that range. If they are in that range and he plays the way that we think he can, I think no doubt in my mind he's a finalist. And then if you look at his contribution to his team, and depending on where they are in the rankings at that time, I think if they go into that game against Clemson in the ACC title game with a chance to make the playoff, he'll be your Heisman winner. I think if he has the type of season that we know he is capable of having, he will be your Heisman winner. Look, Spencer Rattler's a heck of a player. There's times where Spencer Rattler will turn the football over, and I think that Sam Howell is a guy. If you told me I need a guy for one drive, I'm not taking any quarterback in football in college football right now over Sam Howell. I'm not doing it. So I think Slinging Sammy Howell is your Heisman Trophy winner in 2021.
I'd love to see it, and I think there's a legitimate chance he could win the Heisman. I think a lot has to go wrong if he's not even a finalist. The reason why I have him being a finalist and not ultimately winning the Heisman, and this is where the Heisman Trophy has lost the meaning. It's now usually to win the Heisman, you got to be on a team that competes to win the national championship, at least in the college football playoff. I don't think, and this is my final bold prediction, and it's really hard to say this, and I'll dive into why I don't think it happens. I don't think Carolina makes the ACC championship game. And it's more of how the schedule lays out for them. On the road at Virginia Tech is as tough an opener this team could have asked for. In that environment, on a Friday night, which we can have an argument of them playing on Friday to start the season, but that's whatever. I think you're looking at a loss to start the season. You've only won twice there since they joined the ACC, and for whatever it is, Virginia Tech hates Carolina. Fuente and his program has carried that on since Beamer retired. It's a rivalry to them, not to us. They'll be up for that game. And then the swing game for them is that Miami game. And I know it's at home. I know what we did to Miami a year ago. But I think it's put up or shut up for Manny Diaz. I think De'Aaron King is the best quarterback in the country that a lot of people kind of just forget about. Because you've got Sam Howell, you got Spencer Rattler, Bryce Young coming into Alabama.
DJ Uiagalelei.
Yeah. And take it a step further, I think Miami is going to beat Alabama to start the season, springboarding a season for them to get to the ACC championship game. I think we'll lose to Miami at home. That gives us two conference losses. I think we go 6-2 in the conference. Our third loss at Notre Dame. They've only won once there ever. It's at the end of October. It's going to be cold. It's going to be miserable. So I don't think Carolina makes the ACC championship game.
Well, that's as bold as it gets.
I'm going to be quite frank, and I've reiterated it on here if they don't make the ACC title game, barring severe injuries, Sam Howell or a lot of guys, this season is a failure.
So you're thinking that this is a team that's headed for a failing season?
Ultimately, yes. You've got the best quarterback in program history, and you're looking at the possibility, in my opinion, of not making the ACC championship game. And people, well, how can you not trust this team? Look at the games they've lost. Last year, the losses to Virginia, to Florida State, were inexcusable. And as I mentioned about the schedule, when has Carolina played their best football under Mack Brown? It's been in November. You put that Miami game in November, I think Carolina wins that game, and I think they make the ACC championship game. I think if you put that Miami game at the end of October, I don't think when they play Miami, the running game's going to be what it needs to be for this offense to do what it needs to do to function. And I think that's why. I think if you give them last year's schedule, I'd put them in there. but I think the schedule doesn't lean to them to be successful, successful enough to make the ACC title game. And when it's all said and done, it's going to be like a lost season.
Yeah, I mean, look, that first game against Virginia Tech is not any Carolina fan, because I've seen Tar Heel fans that say, look, Virginia Tech's struggling. Carolina should have no issue with them. That's the first game of the year. You're playing on the road in Blacksburg. It's the first time in over a year that place is going to be even remotely close to the environment that it's been. That is going to be a tough game. Carolina has played up there with quarterbacks that are not that great. Braxton Burmeister is not great. Braxton Burmeister is one of the worst starting quarterbacks in the ACC right now. But that's something that, even though they may not have had the best quarterbacks over the last couple of years, Carolina struggled against them. So I think it's going to be a tough game out of the gate. But I think that's one of those games where you've been preparing for that one for months, and that's a game that I feel like Mack Brown, going in, I'm thinking he's taking a similar mindset to us, if not more so. I mean, he's talked about it a lot. We need to dust he said this multiple times as well, we need to dust the sugar off of ourselves, because everybody has been sweet on us. They have been hyping us up.
I haven't.
They have been hyping us up in the preseason because they think that we've done something. He said right out, we haven't accomplished anything. We're an 8-4 football team, and we lost to Virginia and Florida State.
And people get mad at me when I reiterate what he says.
I mean, I get it. Here's the thing about not trying to go off of that as a gauge for this season. For him, and it's something that you should keep in mind as well, it makes sense. You should be hammering that home to your guys, especially that Florida State game. Guys, we came into that game thinking we were the number 5 team in the country. He said, look, I told our guys, look at how many conferences aren't playing yet, that we're not the number 5 team in the country. But they thought they were, and they went in there and lost. That was an experience that he hopes will humble them. Same thing with Virginia. That was another game where they felt like, look, we've lost to them 3 straight years, but we can walk in here. This is not a good Virginia team. They've won 1 game. We should have no problem beating that team. My thing is that you would hope, and I think it's more about you trust that Mack Brown and his staff have these guys in a better mindset. And even some of the leaders on the team, like Sam Howell, to say, well, we went through that last year. Well, I mean, they have had guys that have been asked that question of, you guys were number 5 in the country last year. Mack Brown says that you guys were full of yourselves and got beaten that game against Florida State. How do you adjust that mindset for this year? You would hope that they have adjusted that mindset.
I mean, you'd hope.
And I think that they probably have to a certain extent. And I feel like that's one of the reasons they can win that game against Virginia Tech and will win that game against Virginia Tech out of the gate. The game against Miami, I mean, it's a weird series too, because the win streaks in that series are all over the place. The fact that Carolina has won 2 in a row against them is pretty crazy. But Carolina has had Miami's number for the most part since that team's come to the ACC. There's a lot of things to like about Miami this year. I think the biggest thing for Miami at that time is, Carolina lost their running backs. You wonder if they're going to be able to run the ball. I mean, they're not going to run it as well as they did last year. Anybody that thinks that's going to happen, you're playing yourself.
If they can do that, they'll make the college football playoff.
If they can do that, I'm going to be honest with you. Yeah, I think so too. And I'm going to be honest. At that point, what running back in the country wouldn't want to come and play in that offense? Because clearly that's the system that's just working wonders for you. But, I mean, look, do I think Ty Chandler can carry enough in that game? And I think from the group that's back there, right around that time as well, that'll be 5th or 6th game of the year. Don't you feel like if he's going to emerge, that's around the time where Caleb Hood starts to sort of get things rolling and sort of starts to figure some things out, if he's going to?
The Miami thing for me is more about what they do week 1 and what we do week 1. Them beating Alabama, in my opinion, There's no better way to start your season.
I mean, look, you're about the only person that has that prediction. I think there's a
lot of people that they're
not beating that.
There's not
too much for Alabama.
So I think it's just going to springboard a big season for Miami, where we start the season high expectations and all that, and we've seen this program in this situation before. And what happens? They crap the bed, and I think that's why.
I mean, Miami's crapped the bed plenty of times here in recent memory as well. I mean, that's not a team that you can rely on in terms of expectations either. So, I mean, look, I think it's possible. If anybody thinks that Alabama's going to roll in there and destroy them, it's not going to happen. That is going to be, like, everybody's talking about how good Clemson Georgia is going to be. That game between Alabama and Miami is going to sneak up on some people.
Yes.
And they will realize, if you're not watching that game, that is one where all of a sudden on that first Saturday you're going to say, whoa, we got to get over here because something's happening. So, I mean, I think it's possible. The Notre Dame thing, I've said this multiple times already. Do I think there's a chance they could beat that team? Yes, because they lose a lot from a year ago. I don't think, I don't think many people think, Jack Cohen, the transfer from Wisconsin, is not going to be what Ian Book was. Ian Book was a very underrated quarterback in terms of what he did for Notre Dame. He got them to the playoff, and it's going to be tough to replace him. But Carolina has won one football game all time against Notre Dame. That was a game that Cam Sexton was your starting quarterback in. They have never won in South Bend. And to be frank, they have never really come all that close to winning there. That one, the fact that they are favored in that game blows my mind. I just don't know. So I think, but again, I could see 10-2 or 11-1. I also think, here's the thing, and I think you think this to a certain extent, because like you said, that Miami game is a toss-up. If they were to lose that first game at Virginia Tech, that would hurt. That would be a blow to the resume for sure. I think at that point, I mean, you could get into the college football playoff. You would have to go undefeated and beat Clemson. I don't think that is a season ruiner where, like, if you lose that game, well, it's over. This team's going 6-6, 5-7. But
no, there's too much talent to go
right.
6-6. It could have the same effect when we lost to South Carolina and Charlotte back in 2015,
That's
where
what a lot of people think.
It motivates them. They fix their issues and all that. I still think they're a year away. But
to be honest with you, are you really you think they're a year away? You really think they're going to be better next year? Because next year you got to replace your starting quarterback, and you're replacing a once in a generation quarterback at Carolina. Look, I don't think the defense is going to be.
I don't think the defense is going to be good enough to. Because I think they've got to win games at Virginia Tech against Miami. Those games, and I don't think the offense is going to be what it's going to be in November. I think they're going to be playing games in the mid-20s. I don't think Carolina can win like that.
See, I think they could win that first game of the year like that, because we've seen them before out of the gate play really well. Remember, I mean, game against South Carolina that they lost back in 2015, that was a defense that had no business holding South Carolina
That was
to 17.
In a neutral field.
But I think first game of the year. But this is the thing about Virginia Tech as well. It's their first game. They are going to have mistakes that they're going to make. I think that's going to be one of those games where what I'm afraid of happening in that game is you get into a low-scoring battle that you ultimately don't end up winning. If that game becomes high-scoring, I think that favors Carolina. If they can start putting up points and Carolina's matching them, that favors Sam Howell and the Tar Heels. But I think the thing about that game against Virginia Tech in terms of the defense is if your defense is going to play at its best, it should be in that game. Because that's the game you would imagine that you're going to be fully healthy, fully rested. That's the best your defense should look. Because normally coming into the season, we've heard it plenty of times going into fall camp. We hear it all the time. Your defense should always be ahead of your offense.
It should be.
that should be the case in that first game of the season for Carolina. Their defense should be ahead of an offense in Virginia Tech's that is okay, not great. So I feel like that's where Carolina, that they get a little bit of a break with that. Don't like the environment to start out the season, but I think that if there's a game where their defense can give them the best opportunity to win, it's that first game of the season, I think. We'll just have to wait and see, though. Those are the bold predictions for the 2021 season for the Tar Heels. We'll close up with a couple of notes here. As I mentioned, on the recruiting side of things, 2022 5-star defensive tackle Travis Shaw is set to announce his decision on August 21st. Some people thought that was a decision that was going to extend into the season. It technically does, but it is the first Saturday of the season. He'll play his season opening game, and then we'll decide in a special ceremony that will be held at Grimsley High School in Greensboro on August 21st. Carolina, Clemson, the two teams that most people feel like are battling for that. And Carolina right now, early on, when it's come to the forecasts on both Rivals and 24/7 Sports, look to be trending in the right direction. We'll say that. We'll break that down a little bit more. Me and Zach Hubbard are going to preview his prediction coming up here before he ends up announcing that. That'll be sometime next week. And I'll, of course, have a big-time commitment preview on the website for his commitment coming up, as I said, 2 Saturdays from now. Another note, all but 2 home games already sold out for this season. Not shocking. All of them are ACC games so far. You would expect that they are probably going to sell out, the game against Georgia State being the home opener. Wofford's the other game. That's another one that you would expect will probably sell out at some point. But Carolina off to a good start in terms of selling out games, not just season tickets either. They've already sold those out. Those were no problem. Since they put the one-game sales up, it's been what? Like a week and a half,
Something
2 weeks,
like that.
and they've already sold out all their conference games. So, again, you can see that the excitement is palpable around this Tar Heel football team. And then lastly, you actually mentioned on the basketball podcast, nice plug, by the way,
Yeah.
Javon Terry, A.J. Beatty enter the transfer portal. We got articles up there on the website for them. Here's the thing. It's not something to be overly concerned about. Depth guys. A.J. Beatty was one of those guys where you moved him over to the offensive side of the ball. He was playing a little bit of center for you. He was actually taking snaps with Brian Anderson being banged up. He was one of those guys that, look, if it ended up working out and he played a pretty big role for you, great. That would have saved you a scholarship down the line, having to recruit a center. He ends up moving on. Carolina's still really good at the position. Jonathan Adorno, of course, is there. He's been taking some snaps there during this period here to start fall camp with Brian Anderson out. Also, Chance Carroll, the walk-on redshirt freshman, he also was taking some snaps. A lot of people think that's part of the reason why Beatty transferred, because he was competing with a freshman walk-on for those reps. And then Javon Terry, again, versatile guy on the back end. Saw him play some on special teams as well back in 2019, but he was at Carolina for 3 seasons. He was only active for 1 of the seasons. He, of course, opted out last year and redshirted back in 2018. So Carolina, with all the talent that they've got in that defensive backfield, it doesn't feel like it's something that they have to be overly concerned about. But head over to the website if you want to read a little bit more about the fallouts from those transfer portal additions that go against the Tar Heels. So that wraps it up for this edition of the podcast. Head over to the website, as we mentioned. Check out those articles, recruiting articles, as we talked about. Of course, Travis Shaw, as I mentioned, we'll have an article about him. A bunch of other recruiting stuff that we'll be covering for you guys throughout the season. We are also hoping to do some of the scouting reports again this year. Don't know how many we're going to be able to do. There is a little bit less time than I've had in the past to do some of those things. So if there's something that ends up getting cut, it's probably going to end up having to be those, but we'll see. I think there's still a good chance that I'll be able to get to a few of those throughout the season, and it will give you a look at some of those big-time targets for Carolina in the class. Definitely some of the commits we'll go and look at in the 22 cycle, and also 23, 24. We'll go with whoever we got to take a look at some of these guys. Also, on the website, we'll have, as I mentioned, we do the bowl predictions. We'll make that into an article on the website where we'll go even more in depth than we talked about here on the podcast. Maybe not on that last one. That was pretty in depth. That was like 15 minutes. But the other stuff definitely we'll go a little more in depth on. And coming up on the podcast, make sure you guys are sticking around, breakout players. We'll give you the 5 players that we think will break out this year. We've done this before. Some of them have been spot-on accurate. Some of them have been hideously wrong. So you'll definitely want to check out that and probably come back to us at the end of the year and tell us how stupid we were. So, definitely keep an eye out for that and the article over there on the website. In terms of the podcast, check it out. Any of the major podcast sites, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, those are the main ones. But there's plenty of other places that you can listen to it as well. And when it comes to the video editions of the podcast and really everything that we just talked about, the best place to check it all out is Facebook. That's where we do the video editions of the podcast. You'll have the audio editions if you want to just listen to them, or if you can't watch the video edition for some reason, if you're in the car, don't want to have to focus on, us, my hand motions on your screen or whatever while you're trying to drive or whatever, you can listen to the audio edition of the podcast, and you can also check out those articles on there. All those are posted on there for you guys. Also, head over to the Twitter page at Heel Tough Blog. We can, also want to plug our personal pages as well. We put all our stuff on there. We've also got, more followers on there. We want to keep adding to that. So, at HTB Anthony for me, at HTB Josh for this guy, and then the recruiting analyst. You want to follow him over these next couple of weeks here, especially as we get close to that Travis Shaw commitment, at HackZubber2 on Twitter. So that wraps it up for this edition of the podcast. I want to thank you guys for watching and listening. And as always, go Tar Heels.